I represented and worked with so many talented, principled people who made their living in finance. I represented them, and I did all I could to make sure they continued to prosper.
She also said that she would like to see more successful people run for office. And this private-public difference is not limited to domestic affairs. It runs to international policy too. As we know, the US is ramping up its rhetoric on imposing a no-fly zone in Syria. That's Clinton's public position. In private, though, she admits, quote, a lot of Syrians would be killed.
To have a no-fly zone, you have to take out all of the air defense, many of which are located in populated areas. So our missiles, even if they are standoff missiles, so we're not putting our pilots at risk, you're going to kill a lot of Syrians. So all of a sudden, this intervention that people talk about so glibly becomes an American and NATO involvement where you take a lot of civilians.
I do still support a no-fly zone because I think we need to put in safe havens for those poor Syrians.
Elsewhere in the region, we know, of course, that the US has friendly relations with Saudi Arabia, and that's something that Clinton has participated in. Behind closed doors, though, she labels them exporters of extreme ideology. Hear that.
The Saudis have exported more extreme ideology than any other place on earth over the course of the last 30 years.
She also said in one of these paid-for speeches that she favors more robust action in Syria, but she admits that it has been complicated by Saudi Arabia shipping large quantities of weapons, and again, I quote, pretty indiscriminately to rebel factions there.
Clinton has long resisted the publication of these private speeches from which she's made a fortune, $22 million to be precise, with more than half of the money coming from trade groups and financial institutions. Unfortunately for Clinton, WikiLeaks has promised yet more damaging revelations as part of its so-called October surprise. The group's chief, Julian Assange, was intending to make the announcement from the balcony of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he's been holed up. But he canceled his appearance at the last minute over security concerns. Around the same time, WikiLeaks claimed Clinton had joked about plans to kill Assange with a drone. However, when asked about this, the presidential candidate said she never recalled making such a joke.
Did you ever joke about droning Assange? Well, I don't know anything about what he's talking about, and I don't recall any joke. It would have been a joke if it had been said, but I don't recall that.
Clinton's team has not yet confirmed or denied the authenticity of the emails, which were leaked from the account of campaign chief John Podesta. Now, he was quick to blame the usual suspect, accusing Moscow of trying to help Donald Trump. WikiLeaks responded, saying Podesta shouldn't be crediting Russia for the work of the whistleblowing website. Now, the leak is the latest in a series of hacking incidents targeting the Democratic presidential campaign. On Friday, the Obama administration formally accused Russia of being behind the cyber attacks with the aim of influencing next month's election. A group of former top national security officials even warned the media to be cautious about publishing such leaks, as it could be a part of a disinformation campaign. Now, with more details, here's Caleb Boppin.
The National Director of Intelligence and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security have issued a joint statement pointing the finger at Russia for the recent hacking and leaking of emails from the Democratic National Committee and other figures. Now, they allege that these emails are being hacked and leaked with the intention of influencing the U.S. elections. And this statement today is inconsistent with previous statements from U.S. officials. In the past, U.S. officials have said they have no evidence of Russian involvement. Now they are saying the opposite. Now, this new statement doesn't provide any new evidence. It simply says that U.S. officials are confident and that the methods used are similar to methods that have been used in the past. Now, Russian officials have been clear that they have no desire to meddle in U.S. elections. This is what was said by a Russian presidential spokesman.
It's again absurd. Tens of thousands of hackers daily attack Mr. Putin's website. Many of them are tracked to U.S. territory. And we don't blame that on the White House or CIA.
Now, Julian Assange spoke to RT's Going Underground, and he said this is actually not the first time the Democratic National Committee has been hacked. He went on to describe exactly how the hackers probably did it.
Did they hack the DNC? Has at least one state actor hacked the DNC? If you read very carefully, they say it's been hacked many times over the last 2 years. And our sources say that the DNC security is like Swiss cheese.
Critics of the way the government has responded and others have pointed out that they feel like there's an effort to divert the conversation away from what these leaks actually say to rather possible theories about their origin. Now, it's also interesting to note that this joint statement does point out, it says that any meddling in the voting process or the process of counting the votes on Election Day is highly unlikely.
Media analyst Lionel believes whatever is found in the emails, the focus of mainstream journalists will be limited.
Two components, leaked and Russia. If you go back and look and do a history of all of the stories involving Russia and cyber attacks, it was Russia versus Russians versus linked, and stories that we perhaps have talked about where in the very same story that says Russians linked, it says later on, though the government denies any connection whatsoever. So remember, we don't, as long as you can fit it in a headline or a bumper sticker, that will suffice. Nobody's going to read further. When in doubt, blame Russia, and you got your story.
Now, as media critic Lionel just mentioned, the mainstream media is often quick to name Russia as a prime suspect, relying on unnamed sources. RT's Ganesh Jagan looks at how these anonymous sources become tools of political decisions.
What is now breaking news on the U.S. intelligence community assessment of Russia's alleged hacking into the DNC has been talked about in the media for over a month. Unnamed officials first shared their assessment with major media outlets.
U.S. intelligence officials tell NBC News
there is a lot of evidence, according to some reports, which is all pointing to the Russians.
You have unnamed sources, and when you're using sources that have vested interests in the people that were supposedly finding who the hackers were that hacked into the DNC had just received $160 million from Google. I mean, so it's a situation where they didn't have any proof. They just said that they thought that they had evidence.
The intelligence community has now made it official in a 3-paragraph statement which contains no evidence. Meanwhile, there are other conversations behind the scenes related to Russia which have not yet received confirmation. Unnamed U.S. officials told the media that the Obama administration is considering strikes on the Assad government, which could potentially put the U.S. in direct military confrontation with Russia. As of now, the Obama administration has officially downplayed the idea.
There's a risk associated with taking strikes at regime targets. That risk includes attacking a regime that does continue to maintain a robust air defense system. It also edges U.S. and Russian military forces closer to confrontation. It doesn't serve anybody's interest.
Nevertheless, the U.S. military appears to be bracing itself for a confrontation.
The United States military, despite all our challenges, despite our op-tempo, despite everything we've been doing, will stop you and we will beat you harder than you've ever been beaten before. Make no mistake about that.
More unconfirmed reports, this time on discussions of sanctions against Russia over Syria. The Wall Street Journal cites an unnamed source, quote-unquote, familiar with German deliberations, who said Berlin considers pushing for EU sanctions against Moscow. When asked about the rumors, both the German Foreign Ministry spokesman and the EU Foreign Policy chief have officially refuted them.
I don't know anyone in Berlin or elsewhere who would make such a proposal.
If I own the Wall Street Journal and I have a reporter and I need him to talk about something, that needs to say what I need it to say. If I want to convince someone like Mr. Obama or someone else that they need to do X, Y, or Z, then I'm going to try to provoke that with media. It's just simple.
It is often the case that before any official announcement or confirmation comes, there are so-called authorized leaks, meaning the government talks to specific media outlets on condition of anonymity. That was the case with the U.S. intelligence assessment on alleged Russian hacks. In the case of policy discussions and internal debates over Syria, the unnamed officials appear to be testing their ideas. Even if no confirmation follows, the reports stir tensions of their own. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Shekyan, RT.